Some faces become synonymous with evil. Some names we can never forget, no matter how hard we try. Throughout history, certain individuals have stepped so far beyond the boundaries of human morality that their crimes redefined our understanding of darkness itself. They walked among us, sat in classrooms, worked ordinary jobs, smiled at neighbors, but behind those ordinary faces existed something we still struggle to comprehend. Minds that turned murder into routine, suffering into science, and human life into nothing more than material for their twisted experiments. Tonight, we're descending into 5 cases that shocked the world. 5 killers who proved that monsters don't need fangs or claws. They just need patience, planning, and the ability to hide in plain sight. These aren't ghost stories, these aren't urban legends. Every word you're about to hear is documented history. The question isn't whether evil exists. After tonight, you'll know it does. The question is, how many monsters walk past you today wearing the face of someone you'd trust? Let's begin. Across American college campuses in the 1970s, young women began disappearing without a trace. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no pattern anyone could see. What investigators didn't realize was that danger wasn't hiding in shadows. It was approaching in broad daylight, polite, handsome, asking for help with an injured arm, a cast, a crutch, books that needed carrying to a car parked just around the corner. Dozens of women stopped to help the friendly stranger. It was the last decision they ever made. Ted Bundy moved through the Pacific Northwest like a ghost during the early 1970s. He attended university in Washington, blending seamlessly into campus life. Students remembered him as handsome, articulate, and friendly, the kind of person who volunteered at crisis hotlines and seemed genuinely concerned about others. He had dark hair, an easy smile, and the confidence of someone destined for success. Nobody suspected that behind this carefully constructed facade lived something profoundly broken. Bundy understood human psychology with chilling precision. He knew that people instinctively help those who appear vulnerable. So he created elaborate deceptions, wearing a fake cast on his arm or leg, carrying crutches, struggling with books or packages near his Volkswagen Beetle. When young women stopped to help, he struck with terrifying speed. One moment they were being kind to a stranger. The next, they were unconscious, restrained, and being driven to remote locations. The victims followed a pattern. They were usually attractive, with long dark hair parted in the middle. They were alone, often walking between classes or heading home from the library at night. Bundy stalked them carefully, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment. He approached with practiced charm, his voice calm and reassuring. By the time victims realized something was wrong, it was far too late. As disappearances mounted across Washington and Utah, panic spread quietly through college campuses. Parents called their daughters every night. Women began walking in groups, avoiding isolated areas after dark. Police sketches circulated showing a clean-cut young man, but the description was so generic it could match thousands of students. Bundy's greatest weapon was his normalcy. He looked exactly like someone who belonged. Behind closed doors, the truth was horrific. Bundy didn't just kill, he tortured victims for hours, driven by sadistic compulsions he later described as overwhelming. He kept some victims alive for days. He revisited dump sites in remote forests, sometimes weeks after death, driven by obsessions that defied rational understanding. Evidence later showed he applied makeup to decomposing remains, photographed them, and engaged in acts too disturbing to detail. His capture came through a combination of survivor testimony and careful detective work. a young woman named Carol Durant, escaped his vehicle in Utah, providing the first solid description. Traffic stops in Florida finally led to his arrest when an officer noticed suspicious behavior. Even then, Bundy escaped custody twice, once by jumping from a courthouse window, once by sawing through jail ceiling bars. During his second escape, he reached Florida and committed more murders before being captured for the final time. The trial became a media sensation. Bundy represented himself in court, performing for cameras with the same charm he'd used to lure victims. He married during the trial, proposed during testimony, and maintained his innocence, even as evidence mounted. The nation watched, fascinated and horrified, realizing that evil didn't announce itself. It wore a law student's smile and spoke in calm, measured tones. Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair on January 24, 1989. Crowds gathered outside the prison, some celebrating, others simply bearing witness to the end of a nightmare. His case permanently changed how society understands predatory behavior. It proved that monsters don't always lurk in darkness. Sometimes they hold doors open, offer assistance, and look exactly like the people we're taught to trust. The lesson remains: charm can be rehearsed, kindness can be weaponized, and the most dangerous predators are those we never see coming. Have you ever felt like you were trapped by a manipulator, slowly but surely leading you into a trap? Share your story. For months, neighbors in a Milwaukee apartment building complained about a horrific smell seeping from apartment 213. They heard power tools running late at night, strange drilling sounds, occasionally something that might have been screaming. When they reported it, the quiet tenant on the second floor apologized politely. His freezer had broken, meat had spoiled, he was cleaning it up. Everyone accepted this explanation. The smell never went away. When police finally forced open the door in July 1991, they discovered why. What they found inside would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer lived alone in the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street. To neighbors, he seemed harmless, shy, polite, keeping odd hours due to his job at the Ambrosia chocolate factory. He was thin, wore large glasses, and spoke softly when spoken to. Residents who passed him in hallways later recalled he always looked away, never made eye contact, as if trying to disappear into the walls. What none of them knew was that apartment 213 had become a chamber of horrors that would shock even experienced homicide detectives. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men. His victims were often from marginalized communities, Black and Asian men, some very young, many struggling with poverty or homelessness. Dahmer met them at gay bars, shopping malls, or bus stations. He offered money for photographs, company, or simply a place to hang out. His apartment seemed safe enough, cluttered but normal. Victims agreed to come inside. They trusted him because he seemed lonely, harmless, maybe a little awkward. That trust was always fatal. Dahmer's method was coldly efficient. He drugged victims with sleeping pills mixed into drinks. Once unconscious, he strangled them, watching until life left their eyes. But death was only the beginning of the horror. Dahmer dismembered bodies in his bathtub, using tools purchased from hardware stores. He kept skulls, cleaning them with acid and bleach until they were bone white. Body parts filled his refrigerator. A severed head on the bottom shelf, hands in the freezer, torsos in garbage bags. Photographs documented everything in meticulous, disturbing detail. What made Dahmer's crimes particularly horrifying was his stated motivation. He later told psychiatrists he didn't want victims to leave. He wanted complete control, permanent possession. So he experimented with creating what he called zombies, compliant companions who would never abandon him. He drilled holes into the skulls of unconscious victims and poured acid or boiling water directly into their brains. Most died immediately. One victim, a 14-year-old boy, actually escaped the apartment in this condition, naked and incoherent, wandering the street while Dahmer pursued him. When police responded to that incident, Dahmer convinced them the boy was his adult lover, drunk and confused. The officers laughed it off, returned the victim to Dahmer's apartment, and left. The boy was murdered within hours. This catastrophic failure, officers standing feet away from human remains, while Dahmer talked his way out of investigation, became one of the darkest moments in Milwaukee police history. Dahmer's final capture came when Tracy Edwards escaped the apartment in handcuffs, flagging down a police car. When officers searched apartment 213, they found a scene beyond imagination. The refrigerator contained human heads and organs. Filing cabinets held more remains. Photographs covered walls. Victims at various stages of death and dismemberment. A barrel in the bedroom held 3 complete torsos, dissolving in acid. The smell that neighbors had reported for so long was decomposition. Human bodies rotting feet away from families with children. Milwaukee reeled with horror and guilt. How had this continued for 13 years? Why weren't missing persons reports connected? How did Dahmer fool police during encounters? The questions haunted the city, revealing uncomfortable truths about whose disappearances get investigated and whose don't. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. In 1994, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate. His case exposed how isolation combined with superficial normalcy can conceal unthinkable violence. It revealed systemic failures in how missing persons are tracked and how marginalized communities are protected. Most disturbingly, it proved that extreme evil can exist in ordinary apartment buildings, hidden behind thin walls, while neighbors smell the evidence but never imagine the truth. Dahmer's apartment has been demolished, but the lessons remain. Evil doesn't always announce itself, and sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the quiet neighbors we barely notice. But at least Dahmer's victims were found. At least there were answers. Our next case proves that sometimes the killer simply vanishes, leaving only questions that haunt us for over a century. Throughout the 1980s, bodies began appearing in forests across the Soviet Union, near train stations, outside industrial towns. Always the same: children, young women, signs of extreme violence. The killer moved freely across thousands of miles, hunting for over 12 years, while authorities struggled with bureaucracy and denial. He looked like everyone's idea of a respectable citizen: a teacher, a party member, a family man with children. Police arrested the wrong suspect, tortured a confession, executed an innocent man. The real killer kept hunting. By the time they finally caught him, he'd murdered at least 56 people, possibly many more. Andrei Chikatilo lived a double life in Rostov-on-Don. On the surface, he was everything Soviet society valued: a devoted Communist Party member, a teacher, a family man with children. He wore conservative suits, thick glasses, and spoke in the measured tones of an educated professional. Colleagues described him as quiet, perhaps overly strict with students, but fundamentally harmless. Behind this carefully maintained facade, Chikatilo harbored violent compulsions that would claim at least 56 lives, possibly many more. His hunting ground was vast. The Soviet rail system connected cities and towns across thousands of miles, and Chikatilo used it expertly. His job in supply procurement required frequent travel, giving him access to multiple regions without raising suspicion. He understood that victims who disappeared in one jurisdiction might never be connected to crimes in another, especially in a system where information sharing was limited and coordination nearly impossible. Chikatilo targeted the vulnerable with predatory precision. He approached runaways at train stations, offering food and shelter. He befriended homeless youth, promising work or help. He lured women and children into forest areas with various pretenses, then attacked with sudden, overwhelming violence. The murders were brutal and sadistic. Victims suffered terribly before death. Evidence showed Chikatilo engaged in mutilation, cannibalism, and acts driven by compulsions. Psychiatrists later struggled to fully explain. The Soviet system actively hindered the investigation. Ideologically, serial killers were viewed as products of capitalist decadence. They simply couldn't exist in the workers' paradise. When bodies appeared, authorities were pressured to solve cases quickly, leading to rushed investigations and wrongful arrests. An innocent man was even executed for one of Chikatilo's murders, his confession extracted through torture. Cases were investigated separately across different regions, with minimal information sharing. Political considerations outweighed detective work. Chikatilo exploited this dysfunction brilliantly. He knew police procedures from his administrative work. He understood the bureaucratic obstacles that prevented coordination. He appeared exactly opposite to what investigators were seeking. Educated, employed, married, a party member in good standing. When he was briefly detained in 1984 near a crime scene, his party credentials and respectable appearance convinced officers to release him despite suspicious behavior. The breakthrough came from persistence, not system efficiency. Detective Isa Kostoyev refused to accept bureaucratic obstacles. He manually connected cases across jurisdictions, building patterns despite official resistance. Surveillance intensified at train stations and bus stops. Undercover officers watched for men approaching vulnerable targets. In November 1990, Chikatilo was detained after being observed following young people near a station. A search revealed rope, a knife, and Vaseline in his briefcase. Under interrogation, Chikatilo initially denied everything, then suddenly confessed to 56 murders in meticulous detail. The confessions were horrifying. He described victims, locations, methods, driven by what he called uncontrollable urges. Families who had searched for missing children for years finally learned the terrible truth. The Soviet public, long told their society was safe from such monsters, confronted the reality that evil had operated unchecked while the system looked away. Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot in February 1994. His case exposed catastrophic failures in the Soviet criminal justice system, failures driven by ideology, bureaucracy, and the refusal to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. It demonstrated that institutional dysfunction can enable predators far more effectively than any individual cleverness. Most disturbingly, it proved that systems designed to protect can instead protect killers when pride and politics override evidence. At least Chikatilo was eventually caught. At least there was justice, however delayed. But what happens when a killer is never identified? When murders stop and the phantom simply disappears into legend? That nightmare is next. Autumn 1888. London's East End. Fog rolls through narrow streets barely lit by gas lamps. In this darkness, women are found murdered. Throats slashed, bodies mutilated with what appears to be surgical precision. The killer works in complete darkness, removing specific organs in under 5 minutes, then vanishes without a trace. Police flood the streets, citizens form vigilante patrols. Newspapers offer massive rewards. The killer responds by sending letters, taunting them, promising more deaths. One letter arrives with a human kidney inside. Then suddenly, the murders stop. No more bodies, no arrest, just silence. Over 135 years later, we still don't know who Jack the Ripper was, or if he simply disappeared into the fog forever. Whitechapel was hell for the poor. Overcrowded tenements housed families in single rooms. Open sewers ran through streets barely lit by weak gas lamps. Constant fog from the Thames mixed with coal smoke, creating a perpetual gray twilight where visibility dropped to arm's length. In this darkness, thousands struggled to survive, and many women, desperate and destitute, walked the streets at night seeking clients to afford another day's lodging. It was among this vulnerable population that the Ripper hunted. The canonical 5 murders began on August 31st, 1888, though some researchers believe earlier deaths were connected. The first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was found in Bucks Row, throat slashed so deeply her head was nearly severed. The violence escalated with each subsequent murder. Annie Chapman was found with her abdomen opened, organs removed. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were killed on the same night, September 30th, the double event that sent panic to new heights. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was found in her rented room, butchered so extensively that identification was nearly impossible. What terrified Victorian London wasn't just the murders, it was the precision. The killer demonstrated anatomical knowledge, removing specific organs quickly in near total darkness. This suggested medical training, experience with dissection, or perhaps work in slaughterhouses. The mutilations seemed purposeful rather than frenzied, conducted by someone who remained calm while committing unspeakable acts. Fear paralyzed the East End. Women stopped working the streets, yet poverty forced them back within days. Citizens formed neighborhood watch groups, patrolling with lanterns and makeshift weapons. Police increased presence dramatically, yet the Ripper struck regardless, sometimes within minutes of officers passing nearby. He seemed to know police patterns, moving through the labyrinth of alleys and courts with intimate knowledge of escape routes. The investigation became chaos, tinged with desperation. Scotland Yard received hundreds of letters claiming to be from the killer. Some were obvious hoaxes, others contained details that seemed too accurate to dismiss. The Dear Boss letter introduced the name Jack the Ripper and promised more deaths. The From Hell letter arrived with what appeared to be a human kidney, allegedly taken from victim Catherine Eddowes. Whether these were genuine or cruel hoaxes remains debated to this day. Theories multiplied wildly. The killer was a doctor, a butcher, a foreign sailor, a deranged midwife. Some claimed royal conspiracy, that the murders were committed to cover up an illicit relationship involving the royal family. Others suspected multiple killers working together. Police interrogated thousands of men, arrested dozens of suspects, followed countless leads to dead ends. Vigilante groups attacked foreigners and anyone deemed suspicious. The social fabric of Whitechapel tore under the strain of fear and uncertainty. Then, as suddenly as they began, the canonical murders stopped. After Mary Jane Kelly's death on November 9, 1888, the Ripper vanished. There were no more letters, no more mutilated bodies found in familiar patterns. Theories emerged. The killer had died, been institutionalized, fled abroad, or simply stopped. Without modern forensics, without reliable witness testimony, without any conclusive evidence, the case went cold. It remains officially unsolved to this day, spawning over a century of speculation, investigation, and obsessive analysis. Jack the Ripper was never caught, never identified, and never explained. The case file remains open in Scotland Yard archives, though no active investigation continues. Modern researchers using DNA analysis, geographic profiling, and historical records have proposed numerous suspects, but certainty remains impossible. The Ripper's true impact transcends the 5 canonical murders. He created a template for how we understand serial killers. The taunting letters, the escalating violence, the seeming invisibility. Most disturbingly, he proved that evil can strike, disappear, and leave only questions. No closure, no justice, just the terrible knowledge that somewhere, someone got away with murder and vanished into history's fog. The Ripper killed randomly, in chaos, driven by compulsion. But what if murder could be planned, systematized, industrialized? What if someone built an entire facility designed specifically for killing? That's exactly what happened in Chicago. In 1893, Chicago prepares to host the World's Columbian Exposition, a celebration of human progress drawing millions of visitors. Just blocks from the fairgrounds, a charming doctor opens a hotel, affordable rooms, friendly service, perfect for travelers excited to see the White City. What guests didn't know was that the doctor had designed the building himself. Every detail, every room, every hidden feature, secret passages behind walls, rooms that locked only from the outside, chutes running from upper floors straight to the basement, gas lines controlled from a private office, a furnace large enough to cremate human remains. This wasn't a hotel. It was a machine built for murder. Over 200 guests checked in during the fair. Most of them never checked out. H. Holmes was born Herman Webster Mudgett, but he shed identities like snakeskin throughout his life. He was a con man, a bigamist, a forger, and eventually a killer who understood that major events create chaos, and chaos creates opportunity. When he learned Chicago would host the 1893 World's Fair, he saw his chance to build something unprecedented, a facility designed specifically for killing efficiently and disposing of bodies without detection. Holmes arrived in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood in the late 1880s. Through charm and deception, he acquired a drugstore, then purchased the lot across the street. He announced plans for a mixed-use building, drugstore on the ground floor, apartments above. What he actually constructed was something far more sinister. Holmes hired and fired contractors constantly, ensuring no single worker understood the building's complete layout. Those who questioned unusual specifications were dismissed. Those who demanded payment for completed work sometimes disappeared entirely. The finished structure appeared normal from outside, a 3-story building on a busy corner. Inside, it was a maze of death. The second and third floors contained over 60 rooms with bizarre configurations. Some had doors that opened onto brick walls. Others had no windows and locked only from outside. Secret passages connected rooms through false walls. Hallways dead-ended inexplicably or required complex routes to access simple destinations. Staircases led nowhere. The architecture itself was designed to confuse and trap. Holmes controlled everything from a private office. Gas lines ran to specific rooms with valves he could operate remotely, allowing him to asphyxiate occupants while listening through speaking tubes. Chutes built into walls ran from upper floors directly to the basement, wide enough to accommodate bodies. Doors were soundproofed with layers of asbestos. Certain rooms had peepholes, allowing Holmes to watch without being seen. Every design choice served the purpose of killing without witnesses and disposing of evidence efficiently. The basement was where bodies ended up. Holmes had installed a surgical table with restraints, suggesting some victims were alive when brought down. A massive furnace dominated one corner, large enough to cremate human remains. Vats of quicklime and acid stood ready to dissolve flesh from bone. Tools for dissection lined workbenches. Some victims were reduced to skeletons, then sold to medical schools, who asked no questions about sourcing. Others vanished entirely into furnace ash and chemical dissolution. As the World's Fair drew millions to Chicago, Holmes advertised rooms for young women, secretaries, shop workers, teachers seeking employment in the booming city. Many were traveling alone, far from family, attracted by opportunities the fair generated. Holmes selected victims carefully, preferring those without strong local connections whose disappearances might go unnoticed. He charmed them, employed some in his drugstore, seduced others, and eventually killed them all. Some were murdered for insurance fraud. Holmes would take policies in their names, alter documents, then claim money after their deaths. Others were killed simply because they knew too much or had outlived their usefulness. Holmes's downfall came through financial crimes rather than murder. Insurance investigators tracking fraud patterns noticed too many policies connected to one man using multiple names. When police finally obtained warrants to search the building in 1895, they found the hidden chambers, the chutes, the basement horror show. The exact victim count was never determined. Bodies had been destroyed too thoroughly. Holmes confessed to 27 murders but likely killed many more. Some estimates based on missing persons reports and building capacity suggest the number could exceed 200. H. Holmes was hanged in Philadelphia on May 7, 1896. His murder castle was damaged by fire shortly before his execution, some say deliberately to prevent it from becoming a macabre tourist attraction. The building was eventually demolished completely. Holmes's case proved that murder could be industrialized, systematized, turned into an operation where the building itself functioned as a weapon. He didn't just kill opportunistically, he engineered an entire facility for efficient murder and disposal, then filled it with victims during a celebration of human achievement. The contrast remains chilling. While millions marveled at electric lights and technological progress blocks away, Holmes was perfecting the machinery of death, proving that darkness can exist anywhere, even in buildings specifically designed to contain it. These 5 cases permanently altered how society understands criminal predators. They revealed that killers don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they wear respectable masks, build elaborate systems, and exploit the very trust and institutions meant to protect us. Each story taught painful lessons about human vulnerability, the limits of justice, and the terrifying capacity some individuals have for evil. Which case disturbed you most? Leave your answer in the comments below. If this deep dive into history's darkest chapters gripped you, smash that like button and subscribe for more investigations into the cases that changed criminal justice forever. And here's the question for discussion. If you could go back in time and change one thing, a law, a technology, a social awareness that might have stopped any of these killers sooner, what would it be and why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might be featured in our next video. Take care of yourself.